Okay, so my name's Paula. I'm one of the careers consultants here at the university, and I'm based within the careers and enterprise team. We do have a lot of fantastic resources that you can access from us, and all of that is available on the Student Hub and the Careers and Enterprise page within there. So things like booking appointments, attending our live masterclasses, if you wanted mock interviews, CV reviews, all that sort of information, you can get that on the Careers and Enterprise Hub. So please do check that out at some point after today. And at the end of this session, I'll give you the link so that you can go away and do that. For the purpose of today, we've been running over the past few days, and I think this is the final session of the festival, is the Human and Natural Sciences Careers Festival. And this session is around making effective graduate applications. So the sorts of things that I'm hoping to cover today with you is to look at the different approaches that you might take when you're looking for work. Looking at how the recruitment process for graduate-based recruitment can be slightly different to traditional ones, and understanding how to make a successful application. So using things like competency-based application processes. So I'll talk to you about what that means as well in a little bit more detail. So hopefully that means you're in the right place and it's exactly what you were hoping to cover. So first of all, I just wanted to start off with talking a little bit about the actual jobs market itself. So before we move on to the actual approaches and how to look for work, I think it's important to understand that there is a massive jobs market out there to search and to navigate, really, which can be quite difficult. So this is I like to say it's an iceberg. It's probably not so much now. I've changed it to the colour red. But basically what this is evidencing is that what we do see when we look for vacancies, most people will go looking for job adverts. So you might look on Indeed, you might do some Google searches, just generally, searching the internet and looking for vacancies on there. And that is, by and large, the first point of call for most people. But what it's worth recognising is that really is only sort of the tip of the iceberg, if you like. And if you sort of, went along with my iceberg analogy here, that's sort of the bit that's above the water. And then the bits that are further below, that it's about uncovering and sort of understanding a little bit further, are that there are lots of agencies out there. There's headhunters. Now, I know that there are, some really professional recruitment agencies that do graduate level recruitment, and they hold contracts with large firms, people like Barclays. So actually, recruitment agencies can be a good stepping stone as well to look at when you're looking for some graduate-based recruitment. Then you've got contacts and networking, which again can take up and sort of allow you to really explore quite a lot of different options. And often that's, one of the simplest forms of recruitment, being able to be recommended or referred for a vacancy, or if you know people that work there that you're able to support and maybe get some experience with. So using contacts is a really good way of also finding vacancies. And then the final bit that can take up quite a big chunk is internal moves and promotions. So if you are working for companies, often what companies do they will go out internally for vacancies. So particularly for promotions, they will fill that and then they will backfill the vacancy that's been filled by the promotion. So sometimes, being within a company can be really helpful, because it might sometimes be a stepping stone to be able to get to where you want to be in the future. If you're sort of within the system, then you can move your way up to other jobs within that company. So that's just a slide really to sort of make you think about different types of ways of looking for work in the future, and also just to be thinking about the fact that, like I said, what we do as individuals usually go straight to the adverts, and then maybe if we're not successful with that, we might move down to agencies or asking around. But what sometimes happens with employers is that they go the other way. So they'll start maybe with the internal and promotions, and then if they're struggling, they might look at contacts, they might then advertise with agencies, that type of thing. So it's not always the sort of straightforward route that we would expect. Has anybody got any questions so far about that? Any sort of queries, anything they wanted to check? And just like to say hi to Micaiah and Z. So thank you both for joining us as well this afternoon. Right, so if we've not got any questions, what I'm going to ask you to do, a lot of you are probably going to be familiar with this, but I'm not very familiar with it. So I'm going to ask you to go to Menti. I don't know if you've used this before. So I'll put it in the chat, but please bear with me because this is the first time that I am using this. So hopefully you've all heard of Menti. I don't know if you've used it before, but basically what I'm going to do is show you. Oh. Oh, I can't show it you. I'm really sorry. It's not working. Oh, that's a shame. So I don't know why it won't let me share that screen with you. So apologies. You can't go to Menti. I can't do my bit of technology that I wanted to use, but never mind. We'll move on. So what I was going to ask you to do just then was to actually think about where you look for jobs. So we've talked about a couple of the approaches there, not in lots and lots of detail, but when you actually start to look for jobs, and I know before a couple of you joined us, Adam and Christopher, you were both saying that you are currently searching for work at the moment. So when you're doing that, I'd just like you to think about where do you look for that. So if it is you're looking at job adverts, what are you using? What particular websites are you going on? So what are your familiar types of approaches when you're looking for work? So in the chat, or if people are happy to put on the mics and talk about it, you can do. But can anyone just tell me in the chat, where are you guys looking for work at the moment? Great, yeah, they're good examples actually. Graduate Land and Glassdoor, brilliant. Anywhere else that people are using? Yeah, that's a good one, Adam, going onto the employers' websites directly, because all employers usually have a careers section. Yeah, Gradcracker is another good one too. Any others? Z, Micaiah, any particular approaches that you guys are using if you're currently looking for work? Okay, well, we'll move towards this slide now, seeing as my Menti thing didn't work. And what you can see on here, that's a good idea actually, Z. I've not been, maybe that's one I need to add on actually to my slide here. So these are the sorts of avenues really that we would suggest exploring when you're looking for work. And what you will see hopefully is that there might be some that are unfamiliar to you. There might be some that you know all of them. Chris, don't worry about the Menti thing. It's not working. I can't get it to do it. So sorry about that. But thank you for trying. So with the slide that I've got on here, it's where to look for jobs. So it's not exhaustive, it's not absolutely everything that you could do, but what you will hopefully see here is, there's sort of about 9, I think, different approaches that you could start to think about. Now, some of them you guys have just already mentioned for me. So the first one that has been mentioned is the graduate websites. So looking at places like Glassdoor, Gradcracker, that type of thing. And also looking at things like Prospects, Target Jobs, Milk Round, all those types, which I'll give you the websites in a little bit. But those graduate websites are brilliant because they have got graduate level vacancies. So when you're looking for work, at least if you went to somewhere like Prospects, you know that the vacancies on there are usually going to require you to have a degree or higher to be able to apply for any of those roles. So they're all going to be graduate level. So graduate websites is a brilliant website to start exploring. And what you will find on those is that they are very much, it can be any vacancy really. It's not that they're targeted to a particular industry. It can be anything from accountancy through to construction management, so it's worthwhile considering those as one route. Other avenues to explore when you're looking for work. So another one was mentioned by Adam. So the actual employer websites. So if you were to go on, I'm trying to think of an example, like the NHS, NHS jobs, they've got their own website that you can look at, and then you'll be able to find vacancies there. The same with the University of Salford. If you went onto our website, you'd be able to find a careers section and apply for vacancies. So when you are looking for work, it's worthwhile maybe thinking about a target list of companies that you want to work for, and I would be regularly checking their website and their careers section to see if any vacancies come up, because not all employers will advertise externally on other platforms, because in some cases you have to pay. So some employers will just advertise via their own websites or their own social media accounts. So that leads me into the social media option on there too. So you've got some of the sort of well-known ones there, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, but I know there are other ones that you can look at. But most companies these days have a presence on all of those platforms, increasingly so with LinkedIn. That's a brilliant platform to use, and we would highly recommend. It's a very professional platform, so it's got lots of employers and vacancies on there that you can search for. But the same with Facebook and Twitter, not as much, they're not necessarily professional platforms in the sense that LinkedIn is, but you will still find companies using Facebook and Twitter to share their recruitment drives, to share things like good practice, or if they've won projects or awards. So sometimes what that can be helpful for is your research. If you are applying for jobs or you've got an interview and you're doing your research beforehand, using their social media platforms will actually give you some knowledge that might help you during that interview process as well. So social media is another one. Then you've got recruitment agencies that you can also try. So on the Careers and Enterprise Hub, we have a link to a website where you can do a search for recruitment agencies in particular areas of work and expertise. So that's a really useful tool. But as I said just on the last slide, really, it's worthwhile looking at some of the professional recruitment agencies, because they do win big contracts with companies. So the recruitment agencies, you would register with them, send your CV, usually have a telephone interview, something like that, and then they would start to put you forward for vacancies. With recruitment agencies, I would say that you do need to be at the forefront of their mind, really. So if you apply and you don't hear anything, pick up the phone, have a chat with them, see where things are up to, and keep doing that, because they will have lots of people on their books, and the more visual you are, the more that you're sort of showing your keenness and your interest, and the more likely they will be to put you forward. So that's another one. Other options on there, you've got our jobs boards. So you may know Indeed, Fish for Jobs, CV Library, those types of things. They're all jobs boards where lots of vacancies are collated on there, and you'll find them in one place. Some of the sort of pros and cons with those are that they're brilliant for sort of really narrowing down your search, search areas, wages, locations, that type of stuff, and you can set up job alerts on them. But one of the sort of negatives, I suppose, is that actually those are absolutely any jobs that could be on there. Any level of job, from I'm trying to think, you've got like CEO positions, all the way down to my positions. There's absolutely everything that's on there. So the jobs boards have definitely got the place, but just be prepared to sort of navigate that and search through and find the vacancies that you need. Then you've got the speaking to employers, which is what I mentioned again before, looking at if you already work for somewhere or you've done some voluntary, some placements, keep those networks going, because it may be that you might be able to turn those into some form of employment in the future. Or if you're already employed with somewhere, internal vacancies come up, and that's another way of getting yourself up the ladder. Same as your personal networks, if you know people that work in particular industries, can you get a foot in the door there with some volunteering or some experience, or can they refer you? Because that happens quite frequently as well, that they'll suggest that you apply and submit your CV, and that can be a good way in of getting yourself an interview for a company. And then the last two, newspapers, which traditionally, years ago, we used to get all the paper, the sort of physical newspapers, and on a Thursday it would have a big, massive job section. And if you get, physical papers, you will still see jobs advertised in there. But, what's happening nowadays is that the shift's very much gone online. So, companies like The Guardian, Times, you can go onto their websites and they've got a fantastic job searching section on there that you can look at, and again, set yourself up some alerts. So that's another avenue to consider. And then the very final one is thinking about us here at the university. Now, on Advantage, that again is a brilliant resource to use because we advertise vacancies on there that companies will come to us with. One of the beauties of that is that you may find that there's less competition for that because those vacancies have been asked. We've been asked to promote those for our students and for our graduates and alumni. So those vacancies will not be on Indeed and all the other jobs boards, they will just be on here. So Advantage is brilliant for that. It can be anything, obviously we've got 4 schools, so the vacancies can cover any of them, but it's worthwhile keep checking those as well. So that's a little bit about some approaches that you can think about and check out. Has anyone got any questions about any of that? Anyone, want to ask anything particularly? And what I'll do is I will just show you, these are some of the graduate level websites that we would recommend you using, and I will put all the links for that into the chat so you can take those away and have a look at them. If anybody does want to talk about job searching like this in a more, one-to-one and more in detail, we can do that via a careers appointment and have half an hour looking at job searching and those different approaches, because I appreciate what I've just talked to you about there is quite a whistle-stop tour of some things to consider. Great, so it doesn't feel like there's any questions so far, but obviously if anyone has any, then please do feel free to stop me. But that's just an overview there of the different approaches you might want to think about, understanding that we don't always go straight in for adverts. You might want to think about other approaches too. So just setting the scene really there for applications, and actually, I hope that sort of gives you an insight that there are quite a few different things you can do to find work. So now if you have done all that, say you've been on Prospects there and you have, you've found a vacancy that you're interested in applying for, and it's a graduate-based one. What you will find when it comes to the graduate recruitment process is that they can be a lot more structured and have quite a few different things that you might have to do. So in some vacancies, it might be that you just do the online application and then you get a test. But what we see often within graduate schemes and those recruitment processes is that it's slightly different. And the expectation is that there is a lot more to do during that process. So for the rest of the session, what I am going to do is focus on your online applications and how to submit those successfully and the information that you need to be checking. But just as a bit of an overview so people are aware, these are the sorts of things that may happen. So you might have to do an online application and a psychometric test at the start. Then if you pass those, you might go through to a telephone interview or a video one, so using Teams or using Zoom, that type of stuff. Have your video interview. And then following that, if you're successful, then you might go through to an assessment centre. And the sorts of things there with the arrows are what we commonly see happen at assessment centres. It's not necessarily that you always have to do all of them, but sometimes it is. It just depends on the actual employer themselves. What they're doing with that assessment centre is trying to test your suitability for a job, essentially. So at the assessment centres, you definitely need to showcase your skills. And it can be quite, a long process. It might be that it's a few hours, or it might be a day, or over a couple of days. But you would usually be within a small group, maybe 6 to 8 people. And this is the final stage, if you like, of the recruitment drive. There are lots of help online, particularly for the psychometric tests. There's lots of I mean, we've got a free resource, Graduate First, that you can have a look at, and that's got some practice tests that you can do if you come across one of those. But again, for any of this, if you wanted to have a chat with us one-to-one about it, we can talk you through it. Just to give you an example of the civil service, they recently updated us on their graduate recruitment process, and what they're asking students to do is an application form first, then the online testing, so the psychometric test, then the video interview, then the assessment centre, and then the final interview. So that's their process, which is pretty similar to what we've got on here. And they offer, you know, jobs in science, engineering, data, technology, so a whole host of different areas of work. But just to give you a flavour that that is a, you know, a real life recruitment for the civil services, that's what they're currently doing at the moment. Any questions on the recruitment before I move on to the online applications? Okay, so when you find the jobs, so we've talked about, you know, searching for them and what the recruitment process may look like. And as I said, I'm just going to focus now on the online processes. So when you see a job advertised, I don't know if you all are, but can I just check what background everyone's here from? You know, what are the subjects that you've studied? Are you all biomedical science? Wildlife, brill. Okay, so different areas of work then that we're looking at. So if I just used NHS then as an example, that's quite a simple one, and some of you, particularly you, Adam, if you are going for the scientist-based routes, you might see these. So if you were to go and apply for most jobs, what you will see when you log on is a job description. So your job description usually, and I'll show you an example of this in a minute, details what the purpose of that job is. Then you will also find another document as well, which is a person specification. And what that does is it lays out exactly what the sort of person is that they want to be able to do that job. So definitely on the NHS, you will see you'll see the job sort of outlined, but on the right-hand side, there will be two downloadable documents on Word that you can print off, and it's got all of this job description and person spec in detail. So before you start any application, you must familiarise yourself with these documents and this information. Can I just check that you're all familiar with these? Is this something that you've seen before? Brill, that's great, Chris. So hopefully everybody has seen them, but just in case people haven't, I will give you a brief example of them. So let me move on. So this is a job description for a biomedical scientist within the NHS. And what you'll see on there is that this is providing information to you to enable you to self-select. So you basically will read through it and decide whether or not you think that is the job that you want to apply for, whether it is exactly what you want or whether it's just not quite there. There might be some things that you sort of don't feel is appropriate for you, or the activities and responsibilities, you would unpick that. So what it also does is it gives you the description of, usually it depends on the company you're going for, but on these ones on the NHS it will just give you a grade usually rather than an actual pay scale, but a lot of vacancies will actually show you how much you get paid, where you're going to be based, who you're going to report to. If you've got some areas of responsibility like managing staff, it will tell you about that as well. So lots and lots of information that you can gain from this job description. Then you will be able to see the person spec, and again this is one for a biomedical scientist, but what this does is it lays out to you exactly what you need to be able to do that job. So anything that's in the essential criteria, obviously that is essential, and you must have that to be successful at getting through the sifting stage. Desirable stuff, if you've got any of those, brilliant, evidence those, because actually it can come down to point scoring and things like that to see who's able to go through to next selection stage. So anything that you've got that's desirable, make sure that you do talk about that on your application. The other thing to note on the person specs is that the far column on the, well, it's on my right, the method of assessment. So this is really important when you're filling in your application form, because what it does is obviously tell you how these things are going to be assessed. So your qualifications are going to require you to provide some certification for that. Your experience, they want that on your application form, as they do the skills and the knowledge. So just double checking where the information is going to be required, you know, because some bits they'll, you know, say that is not asked for on an application form, some bits will. So just make sure that you know, so that you're not wasting space or covering something that's not relevant. That's also helpful because when you get to interview, you know, again, you can just double check what are the areas that they're going to question me about, so that you can make sure that you're preparing answers for those types of things. So that's just a brief overview of the job description and the person spec. Then if we think about the actual shortlisting process, so those documents that I've just shown you, they would be, you know, been created way before you even see that advert online. And, you know, the members of staff would have gone through that, decided what sort of things they're looking for, and they would have agreed how they're going to score people's applications. Then when you've actually submitted your application, what will happen then is the panel will look at your application and then start to look at the criteria that they've decided is essential. They will then look at your application and score you against it based on the evidence that you provide. So some people will use like 5 points if you fully met something, 3 points if you partially met, and 0 points if you haven't met it at all. Once that's done, there will be an agreed score that, you know, they want people to meet, or it will be that the top 5 highest scoring people will be invited then for an interview or assessment. An easier way of showing you this is this example here. So as you can see, you know, candidate names down the left, and then along the top, these are the different competencies that the company are asking for. And then obviously they've gone through and scored people based on the evidence that they've provided on their application form, and invited 6 of them along for interview. Has anybody got any questions about that, about the process of job description, person spec, or shortlisting? Okay, so moving on to applications, and if you have got questions, please feel free, you just put them in as and when, don't need to wait for me to ask. With the applications then, so it sounds to me like a lot of you are familiar with this already because you've been doing lots of job searching, but what you will see nowadays is, you know, the majority of this is going to be online. So online forms, maybe creating yourself an account with a particular company, and then you fill in all your data on there. What you will find is that they are asking for things like competencies. They will be focusing on particular skills that they want you to evidence, and they might ask you specific questions related to the skills. So I'll give you some examples of these in a minute, but some of the application forms will actually have boxes where you have to write in, you know, an answer to a question of sort of 200, 300, 400 words, and then you're expected to evidence it within there. So applications can, again, there's no sort of one size fits all. It's totally down to the company what information they want. They might ask you to upload your CV, a cover letter, as well as doing the application. So it can be a whole host of things that you're actually asked to do. But one of the things you should do right at this sort of beginning process really is do your research into the company. You know, think about the mission, what are their ethos, what are the values, and look at what are the skills that they're asking for, you know, what sort of market do they operate in, that type of stuff, so that you can just get an understanding, is this the place for me? And also try and weave in some of that information into your applications and your interviews. So I just want to ask you now, for those of you that, you know, you have done applications and you're familiar with that, what would you say that the most common application form mistakes are? What do people generally do wrong, or you know miss out? Yeah, definitely, Chris. Spelling mistakes. often. Anything else? So here are some of the common mistakes that we see. And just with your spelling mistakes, actually, I think, I suppose it seems quite a straightforward one, actually, but I think even, with the best will in the world and attention to detail, people still make spelling mistakes. And especially when you're concentrating really hard and, you keep rereading things, sometimes you just miss them. So can't stress how important it is to get people to proofread things if you can, because when you've been staring at something for hours, often it's quite easy to miss. So just make sure if you can. Oh, that's a shame, Chris. Did you notice before you submit it, or did they mention it to you? Oh, did you? That's a shame. Hopefully, did it matter in the end? Did you manage to get through to interview, or do you not know yet? Okay, that's a shame. I mean, I don't know if that was the reason or whether there was other things going on there, but I've done it myself. I thought my CV was absolutely perfect and submitted it, and then I mean, it was only when I came to look back at it for another job and realised that I'd spelt something wrong. So it does happen, but it's just try and ask for some advice, or ask for somebody to just have a quick check through it, just in case. Other areas that people sometimes don't do as well as they could is just not meeting the key criteria. So if you sort of think back to that slide that I just showed you about the shortlisting, and they're asking for particular competencies, they're asking for people to be, show their initiative, someone that's teamwork, communication. And if you're filling in an application form and not actually explaining any of that, then you're not going to score and you're not going to meet the criteria. So making sure that you do engage with that job description and person spec. Underselling people, underselling yourself, and I think that's quite common across a lot of us, that we just don't often big ourselves up really and just explain what we have done and what we're capable of. So making sure that you do that as much as possible and be confident in your applications. Lies obviously is not, you don't want to be lying on any of your applications. And I suppose this particularly comes down to things like qualifications as well, because you will be asked for evidence of those often. Certification will be required, so make sure that you're not lying on applications. Lack of evidence, is quite similar to not meeting the criteria, sort of saying I can do this, but not being able to back that up with some evidence. And obviously, finally, just not answering the question at all, leaving them blank, or just totally misinterpreting the question and not being able to meet that criteria. So if it's the essential criteria, I would say really that you do need to be meeting all of the essential criteria, because it's scored basically. So I would say for essential, all of them. For the desirable, if you've got some, yes, but if you haven't got any, it doesn't matter, as long as you achieve all the essential criteria. So once you're actually filling in your application forms, you will probably come across now some sections on application forms that's asking you to write a bit of an answer there. It's, actually, it might be a statement, but often you might just actually see a question box. So these are some examples of some questions that you may get asked, and as you'll see there, it's saying sort of between 200 and 300 words that you need to write, which isn't, a massive amount of text. So it is sometimes a bit of a balancing act between keeping it really concise, but also being able to answer the question. I'd always suggest, if you're doing things like this, obviously type them out on Word first, spell check them on there, use the word count as well, so you can do that before you copy and paste them into your applications. And again, that means that you can quite easily just ask someone to proofread them for you. But these are some examples of competency ones. So they always in competency questions, they're always asking you to give an example of something, to evidence something, or tell them about a time. So whenever it asks you to do that, you do need to provide the evidence. It's not enough to say, you know, this example here. So describe a situation where you've had to work effectively as a team member. What was your role and what did you contribute to the team? So it's not enough just to say here, you know, I've worked in a number of teams. You know, you need to actually give an example of when you've done that and how did that team work together? What made you all successful? What was your role within that team? So really giving a lot of information there about and detail about what you actually did, how you communicated with other people, how you were flexible to support your team members, that type of stuff. So really describing, you know, the situation in lots of depth. Other examples there is how have you used your communication skills to persuade others to follow your lead, and give an example of a situation where you've had to deal with a particularly difficult guest and how did you handle this. So with competency questions like this, I'm sure that you've probably heard of, and I think, Chris, you might have been in the session that I did the other day about this, but have people heard about STAR before? Are people familiar with the use of STAR? Okay, that's great that you've heard about it. I'm not sure if anybody else has, but what I will do is explain this to you. So if you're ever in an interview situation or an application situation and they ask you for an example or evidence of something, so evidence of the time when you did this, please try as much as you can to use STAR. In a interview situation, the way that you would use STAR can be sort of quite lengthy, and you know, it's almost like storytelling, and so it can take quite, you know, a bit of time to talk that through. But within applications, you do need to use STAR but be quite concise. So I'll show you what I mean now. So when you do application forms, if you use this structure, it can really help you to just make your example really comprehensive. So you've got situation, task, action, and result. And what I'll do in a second is I will show you a written example so you can put that into context. But your situation, and think about this, like I said, if it's an application written or if it's a verbal interview question. So your situation is you telling somebody what the context is of your example. So what team were you in? What role did you play? What did you have to do as a team? Where were you working? So you'd give a bit of a situation as to what that example is. Then you would move into the task. So if there was something you were asked to do, or if you had identified a problem and you wanted to overcome that, talk about what that was, what you were trying to achieve. Then you would move into the action. So what did you actually do? So given that scenario and that task, what were the things that you had to do to be able to complete that task or to overcome the problem? And what did you contribute personally? Within the action bit, I would expect you to be talking about I did this, and what I was responsible for was X, Y, and Z. So really talking about your own personal actions that you took, not what we did as a team, what you did. Then your R section is the result, which is the outcome. So by you doing all these things and completing these actions, how did you manage to complete that task, or did you complete it successfully? If it wasn't unsuccessful, if it was successful, what did you learn from that? And your contribution, how did that influence the outcome? So it's a very, very trusted and tried way of answering these competency-based questions. And I'll show you now an example of how to use it in relation to a written application form. So this is an example for a leadership question. So like the one that I just put up before, which was, you know, whenever you use your communication skills to lead others. So with this one, you've got the S, T, A and R headings down the left-hand side. Now, it actually, the sort of word count on here, just because of the purpose of the slides, is around 125 words. So a written example on an application form would be longer than this. But if we just go through this, so S, your situation is, whilst working as a volunteer coordinator for a triathlon event company, I had to organise a team of 40 volunteers in order to ensure the smooth running of an event involving over 500 competitors. So that's quite concisely explaining the situation, and the task for the day was organising the volunteers. Then it moves into A, which is your action, and as you'll see here, this is around what I did. So I did this by giving them clear and concise instructions prior to the event. On arrival, I recapped on the instructions and let them know how to contact me if they had issues. I ensured I kept them motivated by checking in on them throughout the race, as well as replenishing water and snacks. And at the end, I thanked them all for their time. So here it's showing your leadership skills there, how you're able to manage them, you motivated people, you checked in on them, you recapped on instructions, you communicated effectively as to how to get hold of you if there were issues, and obviously that you're supporting them by thanking them at the end. So that's a nice example of, showing exactly what that person did. And by that person doing that, moving into the R section, the event was a success and it was really well run with specific positive feedback about how good the volunteers were. So hopefully that helps you sort of see that when you're doing applications, you don't end up rambling then, because you can keep it quite specific as to the types of things that you're trying to cover. If anyone's got any questions again about that, then please obviously just mention that in the chat. But do think about when you're writing these types of things, the words that you use and the language. So try to use as much as possible your action verbs. So thinking about saying I presented, I instructed, I collaborated, those types of words that show the things that you did. So that was a little bit about STAR and how to use that on applications, and that definitely transfers to interview questions as well, so you can use that same format. There's loads of information on our Careers Hub about STAR. There's interview practice, LinkedIn Learning modules you can look at as well. So again, I'll send that out at the end. So moving on to the other part of applications that you'll see. So you may also be asked to do a supporting statement. And this will be usually, if you think about your personal statement you did for UCAS, for university, it looks like that. So it's about a side of A4, possibly longer depending on the criteria, but it isn't the same as a UCAS application. It's not asking you to address your aspirations and talk about what you've done in the past and how you've got to the point you have. It's not asking for that sort of story. What the supporting application statements are is about you cross-referencing that person's spec and being able to evidence how you meet that criteria. So if we think about the, going back to the, where is it? So the person spec here. So when you're actually in a position where you're writing your supporting statement, then what you'll need to do is evidence each of these essential criteria, but structured in a way like this, where it's got your headings and you can put essential criteria and then explain how you meet that, then move on to experience, how do you meet that, then move on to skills and do the same. So I will give you an example of that in a minute, but the way that you do the supporting statements is always linked to the person spec. We move back to that. There. So you won't find you'll get these with all jobs, but what you will find is a lot for the public sector posts. So again, going back to the NHS, you definitely would have to do it for that. But what you will need to do is really match yourself as much as possible. Use, again, thinking about the language I just mentioned with the written questions that you might get asked. Make sure that you're using lots of power verbs, transformed, delivered, achieved, inspired, and really focus on answering the question, with these supporting statements, there isn't time to waffle. You've got to be concise and really back things up. So it's not, again, about you just saying, oh, yeah, I can do this. You've asked for someone that can communicate. Yes, I can communicate. You need to say how you've done that and where you can evidence that from. It's a bit easier to show you an example. So this is just based on that biomed job description that I showed you a second ago. But as you can see there, we've got qualifications, experience, skills. There are other sections, but obviously I can't fit that onto the slide. But the sort of the top section, when we were looking at that biomed person spec, it was saying the qualifications are that you must have a accredited BSc in biomedical sciences and HCPC professional registration. So within this application here, in your qualifications, you need to explicitly tell them that. So I have achieved a HCPC approved BSc Honours degree in biomedical science, awarded a first class honours in 2019. So that, for qualifications, that would be enough to simply say that you've got that, because you usually evidence that with certification. Then moving on to the experience section. So on the person spec, it was asking for pathology lab experience. So here we've evidenced that during your degree, I spent 12 months on placement within haematology at Salford Royal, developed scientific knowledge and practice in a range of techniques such as molecular biology and microscopy. Can't say that, microscopy. But hopefully you see in here, you know, about how you can sort of back things up. So you're showing your experience and the types of skills that you've developed. So for every criteria, you would need to do a bullet point like that to explain, but the sort of length that these are is about right. You wouldn't want to be doing much longer really for each particular one, because you'll have lots of bullet points to do. Hopefully that makes sense for everybody. So just coming up to the end of the session now, but thinking about evidence. So when you're writing out these application forms, so whether it is the questions or the supporting statements sections, think about the evidence that you've got. You've all got your degrees or your experience here at university, depending on what you've studied. So you've got loads of things to draw on, loads of sort of examples of things that you've done. You've got lots of skills. So think about what they are and try and think about examples that you can use on your applications. But that's obviously extremely important to use, but you've also got other experiences in your life that you can use. So any work experience, whether that's a placement, internship, voluntary, anything like that, I would definitely draw on that experience. Even if it's your lab-based stuff that you've done here at university too, draw on that. Any extracurricular stuff, so if you've got involved in societies, in sports, anything that you do culturally, anything you do with your friends, talk about that. If it's, you know, again, developing your skills, so you know, you might have developed leadership, for example, so that could be a way of backing up and evidencing that. And then family responsibilities do count as well, and I think sometimes people are a bit unsure as to use these, but you can use family responsibilities and things from your personal life as evidence as well. So there are lots of places to gather that evidence from. You just need to make sure that you sell it as much as possible. All right, keeping pets. What do you mean in relation to that, Christopher? Do you mean, I suppose that's relevant for your field, isn't it, actually? I mean, if it's relevant, you know, you can definitely talk about that, especially if you've got, you know, a wide range of pets that are obviously suitable if you're going into that industry, and that's, you know, a skill that you would need and to have done. You could bring that in. It depends on obviously the person's spec, what they're asking for, doesn't it, and whether that's suitable or not. But yeah, you can think about your own, you know, responsibilities and things that you do outside of education. And then just lastly, when it comes to your application forms, we've talked about the type of language that you use, but do make sure that if the company are using particular languages and wording, try and reflect some of that without obviously copying it word for word. But if there are keywords that you see are repeated that they keep using, then try and embed those into your applications as well to reflect that back to them. Use as much as you can a variety of examples rather than just the same thing repeated. Use STAR technique, so on your application forms as much as you can, and then obviously do apply that when you go for interview as well. And obviously, can't stress checking the spelling and grammar, as myself and Chris have both learned that sometimes happens. But if you can get people to proofread it, definitely. And again, if you want support with applications and supporting statements, that's something that our service can do with you on a one-to-one basis. But I suppose my biggest sort of thing here is take your time and don't rush things. These application forms are time consuming and there is no getting away from that. Supporting statements take a long time as well. So just make sure that you do give it the real attention and time that it does need to make it the best of your ability. Very final slide, just sort of some things to think about with your approaches. So I know some of these will probably seem a bit silly, but think about your actual the way that you write in your application as well. We do get some emails from students that are using a lot of text talk, so don't do it, just avoid it completely. We don't want to see you using numbers and shortened words, things like that. Think about your email addresses too. So we've got on there, DJ Bad Boy, that doesn't look professional to an employer, so please avoid those types and use your professional emails as well. So the rest of them, seem quite straightforward, place of birth, a hospital, make sure that you're reading the question and answering it properly. And you don't want to be highlighting to employers that you might not have the skills that they need. So you just want to be selling yourself as much as possible, not creating any negativity or doubt with this example here about not wanting to work with people. So that is the end of the presentation. As we've just said, take your time, research, reflect the language, and have a range of evidence to demonstrate your competencies. So all that sort of leaves me to ask now is if anybody has got any appropriate questions, anything that they want to know. And then if you have got any further questions, or if you obviously don't want to ask it now and you'd rather come along to a one-to-one appointment, you can contact us on the email there or phone number. Or I've just sent you the link now to the Student Hub page, so you can go on there and book appointments, you can download our resources, you can watch our LinkedIn Learning, and you can also, we've got lots of guides on there too, short videos, and loads of stuff on there that's really helpful. So if you need anything at all, please access that. But in the meantime, if anyone's got any questions, please feel free to ask. But if not, thank you so much for coming along and attending, participating, and hope you have a lovely rest of the day.